The Alien Inheritance. Chapter 2. The farmhouse was silent except for the faint hum of the television, its glow casting flickering shadows across the room. John sat on the couch, boots propped against the wooden coffee table, arms folded as he stared at the screen. Athea sat beside him, eerily still, watching the movie with a level of focus that bordered on unnerving. She had spent the past months absorbing human culture, her curiosity endless, her questions unfiltered. But her behavior was becoming more human. John wondered if she had noticed the change. Tonight, however, she seemed particularly engrossed in the film, a classic romance, slow and dramatic. John took a sip of his beer. "You've been quiet for a while." Athea didn't look at him. "I am analyzing." John raised an eyebrow. Analyzing what? Finally she turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the screen's light. "Your species' mating rituals." John nearly choked on his drink. "What now?" She gestured to the screen. "This process is inefficient." John blinked. "You mean dating?" Athea nodded. "The sequence is unnecessary. The hesitations, the misunderstandings, the prolonged avoidance of the inevitable. It is illogical." John smirked, setting his beer down. "Well, yeah, but that's kind of the point. It's the build-up, the tension. That's what makes it worth it." She frowned slightly, contemplating. "I fail to see the appeal. If two beings desire each other, why not simply engage?" John felt heat rise to his face. "You really have a way of making things sound clinical." Athea tilted her head. "Should I not?" John let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's different for us. It's not just about the act, it's about the emotions, the connection that..." Before he could finish, Athea shifted closer. John froze. She was too close, closer than she had ever been before, her silver gaze locked onto his, unreadable, calculating. "Is this tension?" she asked softly. John's breath hitched. Yeah, this is definitely something." Aya's head tilted slightly, her smooth blue tail flicking across the couch. "I see. So, if I were to..." John kissed her. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated. It simply happened. And the moment it did, everything changed." Athea stiffened. Her body momentarily locked in place, but then her lips parted slightly, and a small, almost surprised breath escaped her throat. Her hands, previously resting in her lap, rose, one curling around the back of his neck, the other pressing gently against his chest. John felt her melt into the kiss, and then her tail flicked sharply. A sudden jolt of warmth and energy surged through the room, the television screen flickering violently before shutting off completely. The air crackled, the faint scent of ozone lingering between them. They broke apart. John's eyes were wide. "Did you just..." Athea stared at him, her breathing slightly uneven, her silver eyes shimmering with something new. "I understand now." John swallowed hard. "Understand what?" She reached forward, brushing her fingertips along his jawline. "The appeal." Then, before he could react, she leaned in again, this time with her whole body. They were locked in a tight, passionate embrace, exploring each other. John awoke to the scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. He turned his head slightly. Thea stood by the window, wrapped in one of his shirts, the first 3 buttons undone, her long white hair cascading over her shoulders. Did she know how she looked? Is she teasing? Or is she just copying the woman in that Steve McQueen movie? He smirked. "Stealing my clothes now?" She glanced over her shoulder. "They are comfortable." John stretched. "So, last night..." Athea turned fully, a small, mischievous smirk tugging at her lips. "It was satisfactory." John let out a breathless laugh. "Satisfactory? That's what we're going with?" She stepped closer, silver eyes gleaming. I may require further analysis, John chuckled, pulling her down onto the bed. Well, I'm nothing if not a willing research partner. The sun hung high in the sky, beating down on the skeletal frame of a new building under construction. John wiped the sweat from his brow, his tool belt hanging loosely around his waist, as he stepped back to inspect the steel beams towering above him. His company had been working on this project for weeks, and today was supposed to be a routine day. It wasn't. A few feet away, Athea stood near the edge of the site, her silver eyes scanning the machinery, the workers, the way humans moved with an unspoken rhythm. She had insisted on coming with him, claiming it was important to observe how he spent his time. John had agreed, half joking, that she was now his alien intern. Now, he was beginning to regret that decision. She was quite a distraction on the job site. All of his workers were nudging each other and whispering. John had to admit it. There is something about a tall, sexy blonde with skin-tight jeans, a tank top, and a yellow safety helmet that is irresistible for a construction worker. But she was too still, too observant. And then it happened. A loud snap echoed through the site as a cable supporting a heavy metal beam gave way. Time seemed to slow as the beam tilted dangerously, breaking free from its restraints and plummeting straight toward John. Shouts erupted around him, but John didn't have time to move. His instincts screamed, his body tensed. Then everything stopped. The air around him crackled with an unseen force. The beam, which should have crushed him in an instant, one end of the beam hit the ground with a vibrating thud, while the other end hovered inched above John's head, suspended in the air as if held by invisible hands. John's breath caught in his throat. He turned slowly. Athea stood a few feet away, her arm outstretched, fingers splayed. Her silver eyes burned with an otherworldly glow. For a moment there was only silence. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she lowered the beam gently to the ground. The metal clanged against the dirt, sending up a small cloud of dust. John exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. The other workers stood frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. One of them muttered, "What the hell just happened?" John didn't answer, 'cause he wasn't sure himself. The drive back to the farmhouse was silent. John kept his hands firmly on the wheel, his mind racing. Athea sat beside him, her expression calm, her hands resting lightly in her lap as if nothing had happened. Finally John spoke. "You want to explain that back there?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "Explain what?" John let out a breath. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the part where you stopped a freaking steel beam from turning me into a pancake?" Athea tilted her head. "You were in danger. I prevented your death. That was the logical course of action." John tightened his grip on the wheel. "Yeah, but how?" She was quiet for a moment before answering. "I think it is called telekinesis on Earth." John barked out a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Right, of course, just your casual, everyday alien superpower." She studied him. "Are you angry?" John sighed. "No, just processing." He glanced at her. "Anything else I should know about? Can you fly? Shoot lasers from your eyes?" Athea shook her head. "No. But my strength and agility are far superior to yours." Don muttered, "Yeah, I'm starting to pick up on that." John leaned against the porch railing, staring out into the vast darkness of the surrounding fields. His mind was still reeling. Athea stepped beside him, her long white hair catching the moonlight. "I am happy you are not injured, John. It would be troubling to lose my mate before I learned more about your intimate rituals." She smiled. "You are troubled?" John let out a small laugh. Understatement of the century, he turned to her. "You said you're stronger than me. What does that mean exactly?" She met his gaze. "Would you like a demonstration?" Before he could answer, she moved. 1 second she was beside him, the next she was across the yard. John blinked. Holy... Athea disappeared again, reappearing behind him in an instant. Her movements were impossibly smooth, like a shadow slipping through space. John turned, his pulse spiking. Okay, yeah, that's impressive. Terrifying, but impressive. She regarded him for a moment before stepping closer, her voice softer. I will not harm you. John searched her face. Yeah, I know. Then, just as he was beginning to relax, Athea's form shimmered. John stiffened as her entire body faded, blending seamlessly into the background. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. A second later she reappeared, standing exactly where she had been. John let out a breath. All right, that one was new. Athea's lips curved slightly. You should see what else I can do. John ran a hand down his face. Yeah, I think I need another drink. Okay, but then I require more time in the bedroom. The crisp morning air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that settled in just before something went wrong. John stood on the porch, sipping his coffee, enjoying the last few moments of peace before the day truly began. Athea was nowhere in sight. She had a habit of disappearing, blending into the shadows, watching unseen. John had grown used to it. Almost. A cloud of dust rose in the distance. A vehicle slowly made its way down the gravel road leading to his house. John's stomach clenched. He knew trouble when he saw it. John set his mug down, his mind racing. He moved quickly to the window, peeking out just as the SUV rolled to a stop in front of his house. The doors opened. 2 men stepped out, dressed casually, too casually. One wore khakis and a collared shirt, the other a flannel and jeans, but something about them felt wrong. Government, no doubt about it. Athea appeared soundlessly beside him. John nearly jumped. Damn it, Athea. He lowered his voice, turning to her. We've got company. You need to stay out of sight. She observed the man outside, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. They are not civilians. John nodded. Nope. That's why I need you to disappear. Athea tilted her head. They will not find me. John gave her a long look, then sighed. All right, just make yourself scarce. Before he could say another word, her entire form shimmered, and then she was gone. John stepped outside, feigning casual curiosity as the 2 men approached. The taller of the 2, the one in the flannel, flashed a polite smile. Morning, sir. Sorry to bother you. John forced a neutral expression. No bother. Can I help you? The man pulled out a laminated badge. It read, U.S. Geological Survey. John barely kept his face from twisting in amusement. Surveying what, exactly? The second man, khakis and collared shirt, stepped forward. We're checking for unusual seismic activity in the area. There have been some readings that don't quite add up. Just making sure everything is in order. John's gut twisted. They were sniffing around the energy signature from Athea's ship. He folded his arms, playing dumb. Seismic activity? I haven't noticed anything. Flannel guy smiled again, but this time there was something else in his eyes. Mind if we take a quick look around? John held his ground. That really necessary? You're looking for earthquakes on my property? Khakis chuckled, glancing toward the barn, just being thorough. John could feel his heart pounding in his ears. He knew damn well that if these men started poking around too much, they'd eventually find something they weren't supposed to. He needed to get rid of them, fast. Athea stood motionless, her body blending seamlessly into the darkness of the house. She was there, but she was not seen. She listened. The agents were searching, looking for something. She would ensure they found nothing. John leaned against the railing, keeping his voice even. I'd rather you not. I like my privacy. Flannel guy gave a slow nod, his gaze unreadable. I understand, but we do have clearance for a routine check. John sighed loudly, running a hand through his hair. Tell you what, I've got a hell of a lot of work to do today. If I notice anything weird, I'll give you a call. Khaki studied him for a moment, then he smiled. That'd be great. The men exchanged a glance, clearly debating whether to push harder. Finally, Flannel Guy tipped his hat. Thanks for your time, Mr. Carter. John nodded. Yeah, you take care now. He watched them like a hawk as they climbed back into their SUV and drove off, gravel crunching beneath the tires. He stood there for a long time, arms crossed, until the vehicle was completely out of sight. Then, finally, he exhaled. That was close. John closed the door, rubbing his hands over his face. All right, Athea, you can come out now. There was no sound, but she was there. Her form shimmered, then reappeared, her silver eyes focused on him. They will return, John sighed. I know. She studied him for a moment. You are uneasy. John let out a breath. Of course I'm uneasy. We just had a couple of government spooks digging around, looking for you. Athea stepped closer. They found nothing. I ensured that. John looked at her, then chuckled dryly. Yeah, I guess you did. She tilted her head slightly. You are still concerned. John met her gaze. Damn right I am. A long silence. Then, quietly, Athea said, Then we must be ready. John sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, we will be. A heavy silence settled over the land. The sky stretched dark and endless above them, stars twinkling in the distance. John stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting another unwanted visit from government agents. Athea stepped beside him, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. She had been quiet all evening, more so than usual, John noticed. You're thinking about something. She nodded, her gaze shifting toward the old barn at the edge of the property. It is time you knew the truth. John raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? About what? Athea didn't answer. Instead, she turned and started walking toward the barn. John hesitated, then let out a sigh and followed. You know, you could at least pretend to be mysterious about this. Athea didn't look back. There is no need. The barn stood weathered and worn, its wooden panels faded from years of exposure. John ran a hand along the old, rusted lock securing the doors. This barn's been locked up for as long as I can remember. He glanced at Athea. You're telling me there's something inside I need to see? Athea stepped forward, placing her palm against the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum filled the air. The metal creaked and groaned before snapping apart, the pieces falling to the ground. John took a step back. Jesus. Athea pushed the barn doors open, revealing darkness within. A single blue light flickered inside. Then another. Then another. John squinted, eyes adjusting, and then his breath caught. The interior of the barn was vast, much larger than it appeared from the outside, and at its center, resting on a bed of dust and debris, something appeared that did not belong on Earth. A sleek metallic spacecraft lay dormant, its smooth, curved surface marked with strange, glowing symbols. The ship was smaller than he expected, but still massive enough to house a crew, or at least one occupant. John exhaled slowly. It is a spaceship. Athea stepped past him, running a hand along the hull, her fingers brushing against its intricate markings. Yes. John dragged a hand down his face. You knew this was here the whole time? Athea nodded. It is mine. I have been repairing it. John turned to her, arms crossed. All right, I'm going to need some answers. Now, the interior of the spacecraft was surprisingly intact. The walls pulsed faintly with blue light as Athea stepped forward, placing a hand on a panel near the entrance. The ship responded to her touch, flickering to life. Holographic symbols danced in the air, glowing softly. She turned to John. I was sent here to observe. John raised an eyebrow. Observe what? Your world, your people. John let out a breath. You're telling me you're some kind of intergalactic surveyor? Athea nodded. My mission was simple, Assess whether humanity was ready for contact. John frowned. And? Athea hesitated. Then, my ship crashed. I did not compensate correctly for your gravity. John stared at her. Hold up, you crashed? She nodded. 60 years ago, your uncle found me. John blinked. My uncle? He'd saved me. John shook his head, stepping away. So, you're telling me my uncle just kept this whole thing secret for 60 years? Athea nodded. He believed revealing me would put me in danger. John let out a low whistle. Well, he wasn't wrong. A long silence passed between them. John exhaled. All right. Say I believe all of this. What now? Athea met his gaze. Now, we leave. We, John screamed. Are you assuming I will leave Earth just like that? I must return home and let my people know that the Earth is not yet ready for contact. Maybe in a few hundred years we can try again. I am hoping you will come with me, John. I now need to be with you. It will make me very sad to leave without you, but I must leave soon. The farmhouse was bathed in warm candlelight, the scent of freshly brewed tea mingling with the crisp night air drifting through the open windows. John sat on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. Athea stood near the kitchen, gracefully pouring herself a drink. The light from the stove cast a soft glow on her smooth blue skin, illuminating the faint shimmer beneath the surface. John watched her, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You're awfully quiet tonight. Athea turned, her silver eyes locked onto his. I am contemplating. John chuckled. That doesn't sound ominous at all. She took a slow sip from her cup before setting it down. Then in one fluid motion she crossed the room, stopping just inches from him. I have reached a conclusion. John arched an eyebrow. About what? She tilted her head slightly. Intimacy. John nearly choked on his own breath. Oh. Athea leaned in, her face mere inches from his, her voice a whisper. It is inefficient. John blinked, caught somewhere between confusion and amusement. Inefficient? She nodded. There are too many variables, too much hesitation, unnecessary resistance. John laughed. Well, sorry if we don't all function like logical computers. Athea smirked. However, she stepped closer, placing one delicate hand on his chest. It is also pleasurable. John felt his pulse spike. You figured that out, huh? Then she kissed him. It was soft at first, teasing, her lips barely brushing against his. Then, with deliberate intent, she deepened the kiss, pressing herself against him. John's hands instinctively found her waist, fingers curling around the curve of her hips. Athea let out a quiet hum of approval, her tail flicking lightly across his arm, a warm, smooth sensation that sent an unexpected shiver up his spine. John broke the kiss, exhaling. Okay, that was... Athea interrupted him by gently pushing him back against the couch. I am not finished. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. John stretched, rolling over onto his back, his mind still swimming from the day before. It was a real marathon. How could he be in love with an alien? Some good old Earth girl wouldn't do? Claire said she was going to be trouble, but I guess she didn't think of this. Athea lay beside him, head propped up on her hand, watching him with a small, knowing smirk. John groaned. You're staring? I am studying. He cracked an eye open. That sounds worse. Athea reached out, dragging a single finger down his chest. Your species is curious. I am simply returning the favor. John chuckled, running a hand through his hair. And? What's the verdict? Her silver eyes gleamed mischievously. Highly inefficient, but deeply satisfying. John laughed, stretching again. I'll take it. She sat up, the blanket sliding off her shoulders, revealing the smooth lines of her form. "I will prepare breakfast." John smirked. "That's new." Athea glanced back at him. "I find cooking fascinating. The mixture of elements, the precision. I intend to master it." John swung his legs over the side of the bed. "I'm guessing you won't accept any inefficiency in that process." She grinned. "None." John sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. Athea moved around the kitchen with a strange mix of grace and experimentation. John looked at her, and his breath faded. Standing there, Athea was transformed into her human appearance. She wore very short jean shorts, black cowboy boots, and a white crop top, trimmed to reveal most of her stomach. She turned suddenly. "I require eggs." John blinked. "You require eggs?" She nodded. "For the recipe." Athea walked up in front of John, teasingly close. "Do you find me attractive, John?" "You're kidding, right?" "Why do you ask?" he replied. "I have learned that a woman making herself attractive to her mate is an important part of your mating rituals. Does this appearance please you?" "I want you to love me, John." "You are making that very easy, Athea. And as far as attractive goes, you are a solid 9. Athea, through her research, knew the meaning of this. "What do I need to do to be a 10?" she asked. "Change back to your normal self." "Oh, but keep the outfit." Athea chuckled sexily and returned to her real appearance. "10?" she asked. "Oh, yes!" John exclaimed. John smirked, leaning back in his chair. "All right, the eggs. They're in the fridge." She walked toward it, but as she passed him, her tail flicked gently against his cheek. John nearly spilled his coffee. "Athea!" She glanced over her shoulder, a feigned look of innocence on her face. "Yes?" John narrowed his eyes. "You're messing with me?" She turned fully, stepping closer. "Is that a problem?" John set his coffee down. "Depends." She leaned in. "On what?" John smirked. "How much more of this efficiency you plan on testing?" Athea chuckled softly. In the meantime, a large digital screen glowed in the dimly lit operations room. Data scrolled rapidly as multiple surveillance drones tracked an active energy signature coming from an isolated farmhouse. Agent Reynolds stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, his blue eyes locked onto the map displaying fluctuations in energy levels. "We've got it." A younger agent looked up. "Sir?" Reynolds turned, his voice cold and decisive. "That surge wasn't natural. We have confirmation of an active extraterrestrial presence." He looked at his team. "Deploy the strike team. We move now." John's hands were covered in grease as he worked under dim, flickering light. The spaceship's hull hummed softly, responding to Athea's touch as she recalibrated the internal systems. John wiped sweat from his forehead. "Tell me we're almost done." Athea's silver eyes scanned a glowing console. "We require 5 more minutes." John exhaled sharply. "I don't think we've got that long." A low rumble echoed in the distance. Then, a sudden explosion of headlights. John turned, his stomach dropping. The government was here. Black SUVs tore down the dirt road, their high beams cutting through the darkness. Helicopter rotors churned above, kicking up dust as armed agents fanned out in formation. A voice echoed over a loudspeaker. "This is the United States government. Stand down immediately." John cursed. "We're out of time." Athea didn't hesitate. She placed both hands on the ship's control panel, her fingers moving with inhuman speed. The hull pulsed brighter, systems activating one by one. The ship was coming back to life. John grabbed a wrench and started tightening the last bolts. "Tell me you've got enough power to get us out of here." Athea didn't look up. "I will." John blinked. "What do you mean?" "You will." Outside, boots thundered toward the barn. Red laser sights cut through the wooden walls, searching for targets. John gritted his teeth. "We need to go, now." Athea pressed a final command on the ship's console. The entire barn shook. The ship's engines hummed to life. The barn doors exploded open as the ship began to rise, blue flames igniting from its thrusters. Gunfire erupted. Bullets ricocheted off the hull, harmless against its alien alloy, but John could hear the agents shouting orders, their movements growing more desperate. John grabbed onto the ship's entry ramp, pulling himself up. "Athea, let's go." Athea turned toward the open hatch. She locked eyes with John. Then, with an almost graceful leap, she soared into the ship, her tail wrapped around John, dragging him with her. The hatch sealed shut. Just like the stasis chamber had on that first day, the ship increased in size 3 times, its shields glowing around the ship. The barn exploded all around them. John collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, breathing heavily. "Punch it!" Athea's fingers glided over the control panel. The ship lurched forward, accelerating at an impossible speed. John felt his stomach drop, barn debris flying in all directions. The sky opened up in front of them. Behind them, the government agents watched helplessly as their target vanished into the stars. The vastness of the universe stretched endlessly beyond the ship's observation window, a canvas of stars shimmering against the inky black. The once urgent tension of their escape had faded, replaced by a quiet serenity. Inside, the hum of the ship's engines pulsed softly, a rhythmic heartbeat against the silence. Once in space, Athea changed into her original suit and handed one to John. "The trip will take 8 of your months," she explained. "There is not enough food to sustain both of us for that time. We will go to sleep in these chambers until we are close to my planet." They both entered their chambers, the lids closed, and they immediately went to sleep. When John's eyes opened, Athea was in front of him, kissing him. "Are we there?" he asked. "We are still 1 week away," replied Athea. "I have been awake for 2 weeks so I could finish downloading my reports. I missed you and required an extensive refresher of your primitive mating rituals." Then she smiled. As she walked back, John noticed that she had modified her uniform into what was basically a string bikini. "You like?" she cooed as she pushed a button and the gravity disappeared. John floated in the now weightless cabin, his movements slow and uncoordinated. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this." Athea drifted effortlessly beside him, her long white hair flowing around her like silk in the zero-gravity atmosphere. She smirked. "Your equilibrium will adjust." John reached out, attempting to stabilize himself, but his hand missed the edge of the control panel, sending him into a slow spin. "Yeah, any day now." Thea watched him with amusement, then, with graceful precision, she reached out, grabbing his wrist and pulling him toward her. John let out a breath as their bodies drifted together, their faces inches apart. "Guess I should just let you handle the physics." Athea's silver eyes gleamed. "It would be more efficient." A beat of silence. Then her fingers brushed against his cheek, slow and deliberate. John swallowed. "You keep saying that word." Athea tilted her head, studying him. "I do?" John smirked. "Yeah. And yet somehow, I don't think efficiency is really what's on your mind right now." Athea's lips parted slightly, as if to argue, but then her expression shifted. Mischievous, knowing. Perhaps not. Then she kissed him. "I've got to try this," John thought. He grabbed Athea and maneuvered himself on top of her. Athea squealed. They explored each other passionately. Then Athea got a devilish grin on her face. She held John tightly and whispered in his ear. He felt something smooth and warm slide down his back. His eyes opened. What was she planning to do with that tail?
We hope you have enjoyed this story. Please like, share, and subscribe and get notifications for upcoming stories.